The Southern Californian opens up his lunchbox, says, alfalfa sprouts and kale. If I get alfalfa sprouts and kale in my lunchbox one more time, I'm going to jump. Well, lo and behold, the next day arrives. Missouri grad opens his lunchbox, meatloaf, there he goes. The Swede opens his lunchbox, blood sausage, there he goes. Southern California, kale and alfalfa sprouts, he jumps. This is a huge story. The journalists are combing the community to try to find the spouses of these now dead construction workers. And sure enough, the two wives for the Missouri grad and the Swede say, if I'd only known, I never ever would have packed that lunch. They go to the wife of the guy from Southern California. She said, don't talk to me. He packs his own lunch. Now, what on earth does that have to do with the fiscal cliff? Ladies and gentlemen, we've been packing our own lunch from a fiscal perspective for a very, very long time. All right, all of these embedded problems that we have about what is our tax rate going to be, how much are we going to collect, how much is the economy growing, what are we going to spend it on and why, to a large measure for the last decade or two, we have either confronted or slightly confronted, but largely deferred. And the time of reckoning is coming. You don't need to trust me, just look at the actuarial tables and also look at the work that you do. The economic situation in our country, even though in a recovery, it is a low wattage recovery, and there are still tremendous amounts of needs at the community level, and there are much greater needs that the country needs to figure out how to address if the economy is going to grow, and we're going to find the means by which to support the entitlement commitments we've made to our seniors, and find a way to rescue those most in need, and to balance all of the various factors that the American political system wants to balance in order to move our country forward. That's what a lot of these underlying issues, whether it's sequestration, automatic, across-the-board spending cuts, tax rates, what to do with Medicare, what to do with Medicaid, does it become a block grant, do you keep Medicare as it is as fee-for-service, do you imagine a different sort of system with more flexibility? All these questions are coming to the fore because we have deferred action for a very long time. We have been packing our own lunch, and it's going to be our decision collectively as a country whether or not we're going to jump off or not. How will this election affect all of those decisions? Well, look, I don't need to tell you right now, structurally, the president is in an advantageous position. I'm not going to tell you he's going to win. I don't do predictions. I'll just give you a few metrics, things that you can look at and measure as the election draws nearer, and then you can say, based on what I'm telling you now, come to your own conclusions about what's going to happen. These are things you can look at before the election, and I'll give you a number after the election or on the night of the election where you can understand where things are going to likely end up, even if the results appear to be very close. But before the election, look, if Mitt Romney is not within 8.5 points on the gender gap nationally and in the key swing states, it's very difficult for him to win. If he's not in the high 30s on Hispanic voters' support, it's going to be extremely difficult for him to win. These are not ironclad rules, but they're very close to ironclad rules. And statistically, Mitt Romney isn't there in either category. And if the president's approval rating is at 48 or higher, he's very likely to win. 48 is now the benchmark. It used to be 50. We used to tell you for years in my trade that 50 was the absolute essential number that an incumbent president had to have to win re-election. Well, George W. Bush proved in 2004 that's not true. He hovered right between 47.5 and 48.5 right before his re-election over John Kerry. So you can be lower than 50 as an incumbent, and anywhere you are above 48 gives you an indication as you're looking at the election that the incumbent is likely to win, particularly an incumbent who has not faced any primary challenge, as President Obama has not. Quick history lesson. Remember those incumbents who sought re-election who have lost in modern American history. Gerald Ford, he wasn't a pure incumbent, I understand that. He wasn't elected, but he was still the incumbent seeking another term. Challenged by Ronald Reagan, lost to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter in 1980, sought another term, challenged by Ted Kennedy, lost in 1980 to Ronald Reagan. George Herbert Walker Bush, 1992, challenged by Pat Buchanan, lost to Bill Clinton. A non-challenged incumbent president has structural advantages. And if they're at 48 or above, they're very likely mathematically to win re-election. And if you see these other metrics, gender gap and Hispanic vote totals not moving closer and not tightening up as the race narrows, then you can tell yourself quite likely and mathematically the president is likely to prevail. What's going to happen in Congress? Well, if I had been giving these remarks 6 months ago, I would have said it was somewhat likely, in fact, quite likely, that Republicans would achieve a 52-seat majority in the Senate. Maybe as low as 51, quite possibly, maybe if everything broke right for Republicans, 53. I will now tell you now that my gut is it will be either 51-49 Democrats in control of the Senate, or 50-50, depending on the tightness of the presidential campaign. So the fortunes for Senate Republicans and their ambitions of taking control of that chamber have diminished dramatically in the last three to 4 months. On the House side, Republicans, I think, are going to take and absorb some losses, maybe 5 to 10 seats, but I would say any more than 10 seats would strike me as somewhat surprising. I would put the high end of that at 12 seats and the low end at 3. All right. This brings us to essentially, if in fact all these metrics I've laid before you and predictions laid before you come to pass, status quo. The president's reelected, though by a lower popular vote percentage total than he got in 2008. 52.9 then. No one in the Obama campaign believes he's going to reach that plateau this time. So a thinner mandate, but reelected nevertheless in very troubling economic times. Senate Democrats may hold on to the Senate, but it will be a very narrowly divided Senate. Whatever the composition of the Senate, Republican or Democrats in control, that'll be control in name only. It'll be a very narrowly divided Senate. Nothing will get passed because no one will be close to the 60-vote margins unless there's absolute consensus. And even if there's things that are simply on a majority vote basis, you may not even be able to find the votes of things that are that narrowly drawn. And the House will still be in House Republican hands, but slightly less fulsome majority than they had after 2010. What will become of this? I'll be very honest with you. I don't know what will come of it. I have one theory, though, and it's probably the optimistic side of me that lends me in this direction. And yes, it is possible, after covering politics for 22 years in Washington, to remain optimistic. I feel that it's possible, I won't say probable, but I think it is possible that external events, meaning the reality of the economic situation, the grinding, low wattage level of our recovery, the fears of what's happening in Europe, and I guarantee you the news from Europe economically will only grow worse. It will not grow better. It will get worse and dramatically worse in the next 12 months. External events will play a huge factor. Plus, I think there is a possibility the collective trauma of wave elections, 2006, 2008, 2010, and 2012, meaning 2012, if we retain the status quo, will stop the wave elections from 2006 and 2008 and 2010. So everyone will have a chance to resettle and re-examine things. And I think there's a possibility with House Republicans with a smaller majority, Senate Democrats, maybe they hold on, but they'll also have smaller numbers. They'll feel encouraged that they held, but they'll know it was very difficult to hold. And the president will be reelected if these metrics hold, but his popular vote total will be smaller and his electoral vote will be smaller. One interesting historical note that you can take back and throw your friends and families, if this in fact happens and the president is reelected with a lower popular vote percentage than he had in 2008, and the Obama campaign believes that's what's going to happen, he'll be the first American president since Andrew Jackson for whom that will be true. In our history, we tend to re-elect presidents more enthusiastically than we elected them in the first place. Only 2 presidents have seen their popular vote percentage dim when running for re-election as compared to their first election cycle, James Madison and Andrew Jackson. Point being, it's been a very long time since we've seen this phenomenon. So the president might say to himself, you know, I'm reelected, but I'm not as popular, my mandate is thinner, I feel a bit chastened. House Republicans might feel a bit chastened, Senate Democrats and Republicans themselves might feel a bit chastened and sort of bludgeoned by the narrowness and the deep divisions that exist in all these partisan alignments. Then what do? You have to look at each other and know nothing can move unless people actually move. No legislation can happen unless things move and people get off of their bases. I think it's possible that a sense of collective political trauma might change the psychology of partisanship, might change the psychology of ideology, that has fed so many of the divisions and differences that have stood in the way of progress, and we can get beyond things like debt ceilings and keeping the government open and actually wrapping our arms around bigger, more structural and substantive issues. Like I said, this is the optimistic side of my personality coming across. I can't predict this, but I think it's possible. And because I'm a citizen of this country and I'm not indifferent to its future or its trajectory, I'm hopeful that it happens. And I think it's possible. I've talked to a lot of Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats who want to make that legislative body do things it hasn't done for a while, which is actually legislate. And the House knows that it can't stand athwart history constantly complaining, especially if President Obama wins. If President Obama wins, then they're going to have to reconcile themselves to that 4-year fact and make themselves different political actors than they were in the 2 years when a midterm election told them that they might be able to not only stop the agenda, but lead to the defeat of the president who put it in motion. If that's proven false to them, they're going to have to come to a different set of conclusions and perhaps actively operate in a different way. So, because I know I'm the very last thing separating you from the bags outside and the airport down the street, I will just tell you you've been a terrific audience, and I'll leave you with this one quick story. It's a story about a Catholic school. My 3 children attend Catholic school, and elementary school students are lining up for lunch, and as they head toward the buffet, they see an enormous basket with apples, and they see a nun attach a sign, "Take one, please, God is watching." The children make their way down to the end of the buffet counter, and there's an enormous basket with chocolate chip cookies. And one boy turns to his friend and says, "Take all you want. God's watching the apples." I know in your work, you watch the apples, you watch the chocolate chip cookies, you watch the coffee and the water and everything in between. And as I leave you, I thank you for your invitation. I wish you Godspeed in your work. Keep track of the apples, keep track of the chocolate chip cookies, and all the people who need them. My very best to you.